Hi again. So today I want to talk about my top three favorite books surrounding grief, horror, and guilt. So the reason why that I really love the books that I'm going to talk about today, especially under that topic, is because I really love it when a book can get a visceral reaction out of me. And that is exactly what happened when I read these three books. Now, when I talk about like grief, I mean it in the most basic sense, like grief in terms of the emotion or the emotions that you go through after you go through a loss, whether a loss of somebody or something, and just the different unique experiences that comes with loss. This is definitely subjective. Like you can see the three books I'm talking about, and it is perfectly okay if you look at them and you're like, that is definitely not grief or guilt or grief horror or whatever. These are just the topics that I was getting when I read these books, so that's why I want to talk about them. Now, I also want to just like put it out there. With the three books, and you'll see what I mean when I start talking about them, is I have not experienced a loss that each book talks about. And I don't want to come off like rude or ignorant when I talk about those things. These are just like the difference, like, I don't know, life lessons and what I'm seeing when I read these books. I know that sounds really vague, but again, you'll see what I mean when I talk about them. But I just want to put it out there that I'm not trying to, well, I hope I don't sound ignorant. These are just like the things that I noticed when I read these books. So hopefully that's okay. The first book that I have today is called The Whistler by Nick Medina. I was able to read this last year in August 2025, I believe, and I was incredibly lucky. And I am very, very grateful that the publisher Berkeley had sent me an ebook of this book. And recently I went to a book pop up and I saw the physical copy of The Whistler there. So I bought it and I tabbed a whole bunch of things, as you can see, relating to just the different like grief quotes that I'm mentioning and just different lines that I really, really loved. So a lot of the quotes that I tapped in here, it very much is like the character whose name is Henry, by the way. I don't know why I looked in the back. The summary is not on the back. I'm pretty sure it's on like the front flap. The character's name is Henry. And just to read a little bit, Henry Hotard was on the verge of fame, gaining a following and traction with his eerie ghost hunting videos. Then his dreams came to a screeching halt. Now he's learning to navigate a new life in a wheelchair, back on the reservation where he grew up, relying on his grandparents' care while he recovers. And he's being haunted. His girlfriend Jade insists he just needs time to adjust to his new reality as a quadriplegic, that it's his traumatized mind playing tricks on him. But Henry knows better. As the specter haunting him creeps closer each night, Henry battles to find a way to endure, to rid himself of the horror stalking him. If he isn't able to confront his past and the events that changed his life, this dread, this phantom, may plague him forever. It all started when he whistled at night. So, a lot of the quotes that I tapped in here, as I mentioned, a lot of them touch on grief. And I feel like if you didn't know what the story was about, I feel like you would think that Henry is experiencing grief at the loss of a person. But a lot of it, or a good chunk of it, is sort of the loss of who he was before his accident. So, in his new life, being in a wheelchair, he finds himself often reflecting and remembering that, and just knowing that he is not able to do the things that he used to be able to, meaning like going to the restroom by himself, taking a shower, simply grabbing something from like the top shelf of like the kitchen or the bathroom. And he now needs the help of his grandparents to do these things. And throughout the book, we see him sort of experience the different emotions one feels when things change in such a huge way, because he often gets frustrated that he can't just pick up something from the top shelf. He feels really sad that he has to rely on other people, and at times he feels like a burden. So we see him sort of grieve the loss of his body. And it's interesting to see because with that comes also the grief of sort of the life that his grandparents have. Because, well, obviously, his grandparents are older. His parents are alive and they do interact with him from time to time. I think I only remember them in like a couple of scenes, to be honest. They're not a huge part of his life. they're not like assholes, but they were definitely selfish. So now he's in the care of his grandparents. But he knows that his grandparents are getting older. So he also feels one, he feels really frustrated that he can't go to the bathroom by himself. He can't reach something on the top shelf by himself. But he's also feeling bad that his grandparents have to do that for him. And obviously they're getting older. One day they're not going to be able to not only take care of him, but they're also not going to be able to take care of themselves. So he feels bad that not only did the accident make him lose the way that his body used to function, but it's also like he's grieving the time that he has with his grandparents. And also, his grandparents are losing the time that they could be living. And it's really sad because it's just so well, one, it's really heartwarming because you see how dedicated his grandparents are to taking care of him, and they're always like reassuring him that he doesn't have to feel bad, that they love him, they want to take care of him. But it's also really sad because you see just how different things are after his accident. So he's dealing with the emotions of his accident, the aftermath, and then what the future can potentially hold. And to go back to like the grief quotes that I tabbed, one that I really, really like, it's on page 68, which is chapter 7. It goes, so much of life he's learned is taken for granted. There's so much he never thought about until his normal was no more. So I feel like even though he hasn't experienced a loss of a person, he's experienced the loss of his body. I feel like that quote just fits really well. And like, again, if you didn't know the context of the story, you could easily feel like he's talking about a person because when someone in your life dies, and if you're really close to them, or even if you weren't really close to them, things are going to change. Things are not going to be how they were. And everyone's like definition of normal is obviously going to be subjective, but this is his definition of it. And you definitely see just how much things change because the story goes, it's dual timeline. So we see what happens in the past that led up to his accident. And you also see the aftermath of that, of him being in the wheelchair, him being taken care of by his grandparents, and him going to like this support group therapy also. So again, I really like this quote because it really, I think, does a good job of showing what grief can do in terms of not just your emotions, but to like the circumstances that you're in. So to go back to the guilt aspect that I was talking about at the beginning, we see how guilt plays a very big part in The Whistler. As I mentioned, the story goes between the past and the present. And in the past, we see how Henry's accident came to be. We learn the who, what, where, when, and why. That's a big part of why I really enjoy this book because his accident just felt like such a big wow moment for me. And it wasn't only that Henry got hurt, but you see just how much of an effect that it had, not just on him, but on everybody on the reservation. Because as I mentioned, he's back on the reservation where he grew up. And in the present, you see that he's going through a haunting. But another layer to this haunting is the guilt that's eating at him. And one of my absolute favorite parts of this book is nearing the end when he sort of confesses something about his accident, which I'm not going to say because that's not the point of what I'm talking about. It's a really good book. So we see his confession and his full story about the accident, and you see just how much guilt he was holding in and how that really exacerbated all of the grief that he was holding because you see him grieving the loss of his body, his grandparents, um, but you also see that a lot of the grief that he had was due to his like own guilt, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm wording that right. You just see like how much guilt he was actually holding, and it was just such an amazing moment in the book. And you sort of get to see that there's nothing scarier than the monster of the guilt that is inside of you. Something I also love about this book and that I want to mention and not take away is in the afterword, the author Nick Medina sort of puts the lesson that he wanted the book to sort of have while reading. And it says here, either way, the outcome's the same. The lesson, don't trust that the face you see is the only face a person has. And if you ever read the book, you will see exactly what he means by that quote. And you will see what I mean when I say that you see the guilt that Henry was holding in terms of his accident. So I think this book is just such one an amazing read just in general, but two, I think it is such an amazing like perspective on what grief can do like to you, but to also everybody around you, and how it just sort of like eats at you every single day, and it has you reflect on everything that you're doing. Because of course, Henry didn't lose. Well, he loses. Scratch that. I'm not going to say anything about that. You see Henry lose his body, and you just see just how often that consumes him, how the loss of his body consumes him, and how he has to figure out his future and what that's going to look like. So, this is an amazing read. Henry Hochard in this book is grieving the loss of what his body used to be like. He's grieving the loss of his not only grandparents, but also his caretakers. And you see how his accident and his loss affects everybody else around him. When I was tabbing all of the quotes, I was just reliving all of my favorite moments, and I found myself just feeling that same gut punch that I first felt when I read this book. So it's a really good book. I hope you pick it up, and you can completely ignore everything I say about grief and guilt and Henry and his body and blah blah blah. It's a really good book, and I really hope you enjoy it because it was amazing. The second book that I want to talk about and is a little bit more on the nose when mentioning grief is called Purgatory Funeral Cakes by Sanho. So when I read this book, I had to pause a couple of times because I honestly just kept crying. This was such a really sweet and sad book, and just to read the back so you see what I mean, Baker Margot and her ghostly assistant Meadle make specialty cakes for the dearly departed. Still living loved ones share their memories of the deceased, which serve as inspiration for the flavors and style, creating truly one of a kind cakes. First, a novelist who reads to patients at a hospital meets a young blind woman. The two bond over mystery novels, inspiring the mystery novel crepe cake. Then, the daughter of a vampire reminisces over her daytime life and night-bound mother, and the moments they shared in an evening primrose field, inspiring the evening primrose cupcake. The love and care put into each cake will surely bring comfort to both living and dead in this heartwarming story of love and loss. So, one of the things that I really loved about this book when it comes to grief, I really loved and appreciated the love, care, and gentleness that the baker and her assistant put into creating these cakes for these people who are grieving their loved ones. I think it's important to acknowledge grief in someone, and I also really think it's important to provide them the resources and the openness that they need to grieve their loved one and to talk about the memories that they have, their fears about them dying, their fear about the future. They're reminiscing about the past and what they hope they can like hang on to about their loved one who's passed. I just really loved the gentleness that the baker and her assistant put into caring for their families that they're baking for. The one story I want to talk about, that well, there's only like two, maybe three, if you really think about it, but I really loved the story about the woman and her mother who was a vampire. Her mom cannot go out in the daytime; she can only be out at night. So you see this woman talking to Margot, and she's reflecting basically on her whole life with her mother. You see her go from like this little girl who at first doesn't really realize that her mom is different. She just thinks it's normal. And then one day she does realize that her mom is different from the other moms because she tries to do stuff with her mom, but they can't do it because a lot of the times it's during the day. So oftentimes they're trying to compromise, or at least the mom is trying to compromise in doing something more towards the evening and the night. So you see how different of a childhood she had, and how at first, even though she didn't understand it, it didn't really quite affect her until she did understand. And then she started to feel sad about how she couldn't really have like a quote unquote normal relationship with her mother during the day. And then you see them as adults, and we learn a little bit more about her mother's vampiric condition, and you see how they don't have a lot of time left. And it gets really sad because you see them as adults knowing they don't have a lot of time left. And at some point, it's like they're basically two passing ships because the young woman will go to work or wherever else she goes from the morning to like sort of in the later evening. And then you see the mother getting up to go to work in the evening all the way up until, or at least up until before the sun comes up. So you see them just try and catch each other in those small moments throughout the day of trying to spend time with each other and trying to talk to each other. And then you see that the woman didn't know a lot of things about her mom, and she didn't understand a lot of things about her mom until after she passed. So you see her sort of grieving not just her mother, but she is also the grieving the relationship that she also didn't have with her mother. Her mother wasn't quote unquote normal. Her mom was a vampire. She couldn't go out in the day. They couldn't do certain things. But you also see her reflect on the beautiful moments that they had despite her condition, or even because of her condition, because it talks about how they went to an evening primrose field. And that was after sort of a disappointment that the young woman had in not being able to do something during the day. The mom took her to this field and she sort of understood the beauty of her mom being a night bound vampire. And you see her sort of appreciate the lengths that her mother would go to try to spend time with her as best as they can, despite her mom being more of a night person. Well, needing to be more of a night person. So you see the compromises and the sacrifices that the mom took to give her daughter the best and most caring and loving mother daughter relationship that she could, even though she wasn't able to do the sort of things that other moms would do during the day. So it was just a really beautiful book. And just that, on top of the amount of love and care that the baker and her assistant put into like helping these people that come to them, that's what made this such a beautiful, beautiful story. And the part of the book that really got me crying and where I had to close it for like another moment is this quote about the young woman talking about her mother. And at this point, she has already passed away and she is grieving her mother in that same primrose evening field that they went to. This quote goes, "If forgetting is the only way to gain a new life, it's okay to forget about me because I will remember you, Mom. Just as you said, if life is a movie, that means you must have reached the ending now." That really got me. I cried and I cried and oh my gosh, it was such an amazing book. I think even again, ignoring the whole grief like aspect of this, it's a really beautiful book. The pictures are really pleasing to look at and just the stories, I feel like they really resonate you even if you haven't lost someone. So it was a really good book and it's why it's one of my favorite books, not just of 2026, but underneath that umbrella of grief. The last book that I want to talk about, and the title is also a little bit on the nose, is called When We Were Widows by Annette Chavez Macías. So I was lucky to get this book from Hear Our Voices over on Instagram, where I did a book review of it. And I really, really loved this book. I have read another book by this author. I have two other books of hers on my shelf. So she's a really great author. To read the back, since her husband's death 6 months ago, Yesica Diaz Taylor seems to be taking her grief in stride. Then, an angry outburst at work shatters the illusion. Her mandated support group counseling doesn't help much. Yesica has always kept her feelings close, so even when an unlikely friendship blossoms with the group's facilitator, she still has reasons for holding back. She's just not ready to share. Ana Diaz has been widowed for 5 years and continues to live life exactly as she did with her late husband. When her house floods, she's forced to shake things up. Although it was never part of her plan, Ana moves in with her eldest daughter, Yesica, but the new living arrangement tests their already strained relationship. Shadowed by unresolved tensions, Yesica, Ana, and matriarch Mama Melda must learn to share a home, their heartbreak, and, once and for all the haunting family secrets that have kept them apart. When it comes to Jessica's angry outburst at work, she gets mandated support group therapy. And her boss is really, really nice. I forget the relationship of theirs, if they're like if they know each other from a friend or if he just really likes her as an employee and as a person. But if I was her boss, I would have been like, your ass is fired because, as the book mentions, she doesn't talk about her feelings. So a lot of these feelings are manifesting into physical reactions. Two, she's been reprimanded for this kind of thing on more than one occasion, but she continues to do so. And three, in this angry outburst, I'm pretty sure she breaks something of the company in her office or something. And that is what prompts her manager to give her the mandated support group. But to me, I would have been like, I'm sorry you're going through this loss. I understand you're having a hard time, but again, you're not helping yourself by keeping all of these feelings inside. You continue to take it out on everybody, and now you do this. I would have been like, you're fired. I'm sorry, but you are not helping yourself. I obviously can't help you. Your actions and your behavior are not right. You're done, you're out of here. So I felt that way. And then you learn about her husband and you learn about the kind of relationship that they had. And then I felt so, so bad. And to be honest, I was like, you know what? I would have reacted the exact same way if that was my husband. And the events that led to his death are what happened to me. So I did a whole 180. I was like, I would have fired her ass. Like, you guys are being way too nice to her. I understand that she lost someone. It's really hard to lose a spouse. And then her mom, who she has a strange relationship with, is moving in. So I guess she's going through a lot, but the way that she's acting towards other people is not okay. And then you learn why. And then I was like, you know what? I get it. Well, I don't get it obviously, but like I understand her reactions to this. And it's amazing to see because you learn this with her, her mother, and her grandmother, the relationships that they had with their spouses. And you see again how complicated grief can be because you could have a relationship with someone and maybe it's all like ponies and rainbows and butterflies, and then someone else can come in and they could say about that person that died like they were the worst person in the world. They treated me horribly. I don't know, slapped a baby. They like set something on fire. They were terrible. And you see just how different relationships with people affect how you move through the grieving process, and you understand why Yesica acts that way. And that's what I really love because I feel like Annette Chavez Macías just writes really realistic characters, and she writes characters and like plots in a way where you're like, what would I do if I was this person? Because on one hand, you're like, I would never do this. And then you learn like the deeper reasoning as to why a character is acting that way. And you're like, maybe I actually would react that way. And that's what I really love about this book. And the grief that's presented in here, it's just so complex. It's so deeply layered. And I absolutely loved it. And you see her trying to make steps in her grief. Like she does go to the support group therapy. She's heavily resistant at first, but then you see her slowly breaking down her walls and opening up to more people. And when she finally does like open up to more people, she finds herself being able to walk through the steps to reach, maybe not reach closure automatically, but to try and reach closure. Because when you learn about her husband, you sort of understand why she doesn't really want to like reach that sort of closure. I don't know. It's really complicated, and you see her just traverse all of these feelings and all of these different relationships that lead her to try and be okay with what happened with her husband dying. And to go back to like my point about how two people can remember a person very, very differently, you see Yesica learn about the kind of man that her father was and the kind of husband that he was to her mother. And just to read this quote on chapter 9, page 83, it was strange how two people could have so many different memories about the past. To Yesica, Benny was her hero. So I'm pretty sure Benny was her dad, I'm pretty sure. And Yesica has this strange relationship with her mother because she's really upset with her mother because I think when her father died, her mother didn't call her right away or something. And you see them talk about it, and you see her mother describe the kind of relationship that she had with her husband. And you see Jessica sort of get this like awakening that this man that she thought was so amazing, so great, was also just a shitty husband to her mother. And you see her like sort of feel bad about that. And that's why grief is just really complicated, and it makes you just see the kind of relationships that the deceased had with everybody else, not just you. I do have some sort of experience with that. This was a long time ago. Someone in my family died. I thought they were like the world to me. I thought they were the best person ever who gave me such an amazing childhood, and they did. But I learned how truly, truly awful they were to somebody else, and not just one person, but like to multiple people. So it kind of had me reevaluate my judgment and how those other people were sort of grieving the person who died, because I was definitely sad. And then I think I sort of got upset that they were reacting the way that they were. But then when I learned about the nature of their relationship, I sort of took a step back and I was like, okay, they were not that person who they were to me, to other people. They are valid to react the way that they are. So I feel like that connection that I have to Jessica and her dad and her mom just really hit home with me. And I think it just really makes you evaluate how everybody goes through grief and how they want to like go through it to reach closure for the person that died. So that was just a really good connection that I had with the book. And just to read the quote that also touches on what I mean by that, this is page 104, chapter 12. And it reads, I didn't understand it, but for my own grieving process, I had to accept it. Just like we don't want other people dictating how we grieve, I think we need to do the same for them. So then I connected that quote to my own personal story. And then I sort of, that's also one of the things that made me do a 180 over Yesica, because I was like, your husband dying is not everybody else's problem, it's your problem. But then I learned why she acted that way, again, as I mentioned. And I'm like, okay, you know what? That's how you want to react. I don't blame you, because I think I would do the exact same thing. And even on page 93, chapter 10, this quote goes, and I can tell you are someone who likes to be in control of her life. And grief is something you can't control, which I think definitely rings true. I think there are definitely manifestations of grief that come, like maybe physically or not, like maybe not sleeping well at night, not eating, or on the other side, it could also be like throwing out everything from that deceased person away because you don't want to see it anymore, you don't want to have it in your space anymore. So grief is just really multi-layered. It can be complicated, can show up in different ways in different people, and it can sort of be a little bit unfair and judgmental of us to judge how someone else is grieving. So this was just a really good book because it shows just how, again, layered grief can be. The person that died might not have been the same person to everybody else. Grief shows up differently for everybody, and you sort of have to take a step back and evaluate your feelings as well as someone else's feelings. And that's one of the reasons why I really loved this book. The reason why I loved these three books that I talked about is I feel like each book touches on a different aspect when it comes to grief. Like with The Whistler by Nick Medina, Henry is grieving his body, and he's grieving his grandparents, who are also his caretakers, who are not going to be on planet Earth for a very, very long time to take care of him. So he's grieving his grandparents and who will possibly take care of him in the future. With Purgatory Funeral Cakes by Sanho, the woman is grieving her mother. She is also grieving like the relationship that they had. It wasn't like every other mother daughter relationship. Her mom was a vampire. She couldn't go out at night, so they couldn't do certain things during the day. So their interactions were mainly in the nighttime. And then in When We Were Widows by Annette Chavez Macías, you see that you can grieve your spouse that died, but you also sort of get this reckoning that they were not the person that somebody else thought that they were. Like Yesica's dad was not the man that she thought he was. Yesica's husband, I won't even touch on him right now because, but you see how the person that died has different relationships with other people, and those relationships are not one and the same to each other. So that grief can be really complicated because you could be talking to someone and they absolutely hated that person, while you're on the other end like, I love them, I miss them. So it shows just how relationships and grief just play a really deep, complicated part with each other. And you see in When We Were Widows how grief can manifest. So just all those different things with each book, that's what I really loved about them. Grief shows up in different way, and you see all of these characters just dealing with it in different ways. I have a lot of other books that I feel like I could talk about grief. Like I said, Monstrilio, a little boy dies. His mom like takes a piece of like his lung, I think, and that lung turns into like a person, sort of. And you see how like the aftermath of that just affects her and her grieving process as well as her husband. And then I also have Breathe In, Bleed Out by Brian McCauley. The main character, Hannah, her husband died, and you see her reflecting on her life with him. He shows up as a ghost everywhere. And what I really like is she talks about how she goes from a couple to like a single person, how their apartment is now just her apartment. There are a lot of different books that talk about grief in different ways, and I really love. But these three books, I feel like just knocked it out of the park for me, especially because they all gave me a very visceral reaction. I was so shocked and taken aback with The Whistler. I just couldn't stop crying with Purgatory Funeral Cakes, and with When We Were Widows, my jaw was dropping like the whole time, and I would go from like judging a character and then feeling bad for them and then understanding why they were the way they were and then just going on these different emotional roller coasters. So that's why I really loved these three books that I talked about today. I think not only are they amazing, amazing stories, but I think they are also really good examples about someone going through the grieving process. And I really, really enjoyed that. So, again, these are all subjective. These are all just my opinions and things that I took away from the book when I was reading them and my interpretation of them. I hope it doesn't come off like ignorant because, again, I haven't gone through a lot of these things. I've never lost a spouse. I haven't lost like a parent, and I haven't lost my body functions. I am able bodied, so I'm not like Henry, where he was able bodied and then ends up as a paraplegic who needs a wheelchair and the assistance of others to go about his life. I've never gone through any of those things. I hope that when I talked about them, I didn't come off like rude or ignorant or just making terrible assumptions. That's not my intention. I just really loved the portrayal of grief in all of these different characters. I hope you enjoyed this very, very specific topic that I talked about today. I would love to know if you have a favorite book or even movie that talks about grief and grief horror. I know one movie that comes to my mind when I think about that is The Babadook, I'm pretty sure, because I read it in The Science of Women in Horror, where it talked about like motherhood and other aspects like that. And I read that like chapter and then I watched The Babadook and I thought it was amazing. And I think it touches really amazingly on motherhood and grief because I'm pretty sure the woman lost her husband. She's raising her only son by herself and things are just really rough on her. So I thought that was a really good movie about grief. So I would love to know if you have a favorite like book, movie, or other medium about grief that you love and would like to share because I love this topic now. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I hope that I see you next time.